Hey everyone, welcome to Aussie Footy Chats, episode 2, History of our game. So today I'm going to explain how our game was formed, how each league was formed, what year, how the rules were established, and so on. So let's get started. So our game was formally created in 1840s, a long time ago. It was sort of the European settlers sort of got together in Melbourne, which is in Victoria, and they didn't have much to do. They were sort of playing rugby and soccer. And so we sort of didn't have a national identity or a national game. So they got together, they sort of made this game, uh, which which was sort of a makeshift type game with not much rules. It was a mix between rugby and soccer. So that it was quite rough, a lot of broken ribs, and yeah, there was sort of not much structure to the game. So there's no fixed members, which I mean in how many people were on the field. So the player count was about 20 players a side, or what both sides would agree on. Now the sides at that time were just what you'd describe as rival neighbourhoods. They would come down, have a drink at the pub, and then they'd go and play this game, which was with a rugby ball at the time. So they'll just basically having a few drinks and then would go down and play some football. At the time, they didn't have the name for it, but so they sort of would have scratch matches. There was no scores originally kept, so there's no recorded actual game. So yeah, so there was sort of no rules sort of created till 1859, which there was a few founding members of the AFL rules that were written down at this time. They were sort of from Melbourne University, and so these people, there's sort of three names that were mentioned, but there's a few other names that I'll also mention. So HCA Harrison, Hammersley, and Thompson and Tom Wills were all the founding members of the footy rules. So Hammersley and Wills and Thompson sort of jotted down the rules and would toss up these ideas together, and then they formalized it and they sort of sent it to HC Harrison, who was like the teacher grading it essentially, and he'd give it a pass mark. Then it was sent to be a mainstream type thing that they would use with more rules and structure of the game. And then the rules went live in August of 1859. So the ball was a rugby ball, similar shape, and there was no throwing, there's no tripping, hacking also was banned, and sort of when you marked the ball, you'd have to get rid of possession straight away. They didn't quite have the marking rule created till 1866, which I'll explain in a second. So there's four quarters established. The boundary line was off field, which was out of play, which would have been off the grass. So there's no actual sort of markings on the ground at that time. And sort of 40 per side, so 80 on the field at one time. And to break it down, eventually they broke it down to 32, and then 25 on the field, and then 20, and then to the 18 we got today. But that was over a process of time, sort of, around 1866 and stuff like that. They sort of just critiqued the rules and sort of, so things changed a bit, and they added in a bounce, which was every 20 yards of running. So every time you'd run 20 yards, you'd have to bounce the ball. And then eventually it was marked down to 10 yards, sort of in 1867. And then it was also 20 a side, and it was broken down from there to 18. So yeah, they thought it was more harder to bounce the ball at 10 yards and have a chance of instead of running that far. So the first recorded game of football, Australian rules football, was Melbourne Grammar versus Scotch College in 1858. The score was 3-1. Now, this is an interesting one because Tom Wills said this 20 years later. But at the time, Tom Wills was the first umpire who was co-umpiring with John McAdam. He was the headmaster of Scotch College. So he was originally the headmaster, and Tom Wills was on the committee of Melbourne Grammar. So yes, Melbourne Grammar they worked together and put the first official game. History says that it ended in a draw, but Tom Wills reckons it was 3-1. So it's a bit of a confusing one. So that's just a bit of a fun fact. 20 years later, we got the actual original score. So that was quite interesting. So we have the history of how our football was created. The man named Thomas Sherrin, a saddler who tweaked a wonky rugby ball. So he was a saddler. A saddler at the time was a guy that made saddles for horses that did a lot of leather work. So he had a craft in making leather, which is what our ball was made of. As a bladder inside, has a leather stitching on the outside. He essentially rounded the edges so it was better bounce, and so the ball became the go in 1880. So the ball sort of the evolution of the ball sort of started when we first used a rugby ball, but then the first proper Sherrin was in 1880. So that's a very important one. That's the same ball that we use today, and the evolution of how the ball's got to now. Yeah, so that's a little fun fact as well. They're great footies. That's what we use today in the current day. So just explaining that with the first game. So that wasn't structured till more about 1866 with the mark. And so they had the mark, and then obviously take the ball. The bounce as well went from 20 yards to 10 yards. And that's essentially what we got today with the 12 steps, as I've already said. So now we'll sort of talk about the first football club that was created that we know today. So in 1858, the Melbourne Football Club was created. 6 months later, the Geelong Football Club was created in 1859. Also, Melbourne Uni Football Club was the first game was against St Kilda on May 28th, 1859. There was also another team called Castlemaine, which was formed in 1859. It was sort of dormant in certain years from sort of 1860 to 1871, but came back in 1871, and then it actually went defunct in 1971 in the VFA. But the league went from VFA to VFL with these teams. So 1858 was Melbourne, 1859 Geelong, Melbourne Uni, South Yarra in 1860. 1871 was the Essendon Bombers that we have today, the Essendon Football Club. Collingwood and Castlemaine in 1875 for Collingwood, Castlemaine 1860. And 1873 for Footscray, which is the Western Bulldogs that we know today. Fitzroy in 1873, St Kilda in 1879, which was the VFA from 1877 to 1896. So it's a bit confusing trying to explain all that. It was the first sort of established league, and it's going back a long time ago in the 1800s. So it might have been a bit to process then. obviously our game it still had the goals, which is the two big posts, which is a goal between the middle of that and the point post. So the big sticks in the middle, 6 points. But back then they sort of scored it a bit different. It wasn't till they started the VFA and they did the scoring system of 6 points between the big two posts and 1 point between the big post and the little post. Outside the little two posts, that's out in the full. I'll go into more detail of that when I explain the rules in the next episode of episode 3. So this is the probably more key part of explaining leagues. So the VFL was created in April 18th of 1896. So that's very important. VFL is Victorian Football League. And we also had other leagues for other states that were created, which I'll go into detail. And this is long before what we have today, which is the National League of the AFL. So this was the Victorian League. That's where footy's home is and how it was created. So yeah, the first season was in 1897. That year, Essendon beat Geelong in the grand final with the score of 15 points to 6. So not a real high scoring game, which indicates to me that it would have been very contested and very hard at it. So contested balls where you're between your opponent and you got to pick the ball up before them, and you got the ball before them and you've got the contested possession. So it would have been really brutal, probably would have been a hard slug, not very high scoring. So yeah, so that sort of drew crowds in to Melbourne. And to establish the other sides that followed that, there was South Melbourne in 1897, Richmond in 1908, Hawthorn and North Melbourne in 1925. These are the clubs that we know today. So yeah, I think Melbourne Uni finished up in 1908. So they were finished. So that's not the Melbourne Football Club. That's separate. So, and also Brisbane at the time, from 1987 to when the VFL was ceased. So also Fitzroy in 1873. Yeah, so that sort of was interesting. The other leagues that I'll mention, which are in other states. So we each, when football was created, they were in each state. It wasn't a national game. It was a state league game at the time. So yeah, so the 1877 was the first year of the SANFL, which is South Australian National Football League. The Waffle, which is in Western Australia, was created in 1885. So they spread across our states. At the time, rugby was bigger in New South Wales and Queensland. So they sort of didn't get established till they had the Brisbane Bears come in, which I'll get into that in a second. But sort of for a long time there, the VFL, the SANFL and the Waffle were what we call our leagues. So then they also played State of Origin, which was state versus state. So the best players out of those leagues in their state would form into a state team, which was South Australia, and then you'd have South Australia versus Victoria, which is the best players from the VFL versus the best players from the SANFL. And also the WAFL, the Waffle, they would have their best players versus the other states as well. Each state ended up making a State of Origin team over the years, but this is most important, that the biggest rivalry generally is South Australia versus Victoria. And So it was pretty honourable for you to get nominated to play State of Origin. That was what we called the highest level of football for that time, because you're the best players representing your league. So it was quite an honour. I had my great grandpa. He played in the SANFL. He's a Hall of Famer at South Adelaide, and so is my great uncle, which is his brother. So yeah, my great uncle was state captain in the 1930s, and also, which is a great honour. Captain is the pinnacle of leadership in the team and recognition that you're leading the team as a captain. That's your role. And my great grandpa got best on ground in a game against the Waffle, the Western Australian side, national side. Sorry, so yeah, so he got best on ground, which he was given a cigarette case at the time, which I still have to this day. So obviously back in the day, smoking was a thing like that, but yeah, so they had that's how they obviously these days we don't have any smoking sponsors or anything like that, so which is a good thing. It's healthy for people. So yeah, that's a bit of like just my personal family background with football. So State of Origin ran from most of all the way up to the 90s, 1990, in the late 90s, and yeah, so it was quite an honour. Those games were the best of the best. They had so much skill. You can look back now and see the talent that was involved in those games and how much of an honour it was. And they're actually bringing that back this day. So this February the 14th, I believe it's going to be Victoria versus Western Australia. And it's going to be all the best players from those states representing each other. And so that gives a bit of history and understanding towards that. But let's just go back to the VFL. So all the leagues sort of understood that we sort of needed, and the country sort of wanted to move forward and have a national game. So it was like a national teams. And sort of just a bit like the NFL in America, how it's a national sort of sport. They sort of got together and they had to sort of rebrand the VFL, and it was sort of agreed upon by all the states that they'd rebrand the VFL. So in 1990, the VFL was rebranded as the AFL. So that introduced other sides, because they had West Coast that was created. Just going through my notes to get this 100% correct. So yeah, West Coast was created in 1987 and was in the VFL from 1987 to 1990, which was the same year Brisbane Bears was also created and was playing in the VFL. And then they rebranded the VFL as the AFL and kept those teams in. They changed the Brisbane Bears to the Brisbane Lions. West Coast stayed the same. West Coast is in Western Australia, and that was their team, and that become they sort of introduced that to the VFL. Then in 1990 they changed it, so it was a national side, and all the teams went national. And then they actually introduced a few more sides, which introduced the Adelaide Crows, which was formed in 1990, but was their first year in 1991. So that was this first South Australian team introduced to the national competition, which is the AFL. So Fremantle Dockers was created in 1995. That was the second Western Australian side. So Western Australia had two sides there, which was the Fremantle Dockers, and the West Coast Eagles, which I just mentioned. And then Port Adelaide in 1997 was formed from the Port Magpies, which had a history in the SANFL, but they had to rebrand it because Collingwood, so Port Adelaide Magpies got the licensing for it, and then they created the Port Power, which we know today, because there's two teams that would have the Magpie emblem, which is Collingwood. So they went with just a bit of a change in just the name, but still history ties from back then to just have that history part of our game, which I've just gone through and explained each league with the SNFL. So it gives it's the only club that's formed in the AFL time that still has ties to history of the SNFL, which is great for our game. Confusing, I understand, but I hope I broke it down a bit so you can understand that. So there's also two new sides which were created, Gold Coast in 2010 and GWS the same year. They didn't play to the following year, but that's the year they were established and created, which has given us the 18-team competition with the AFL, what we have today. So that's what you'll see. So there's a top 8. There's 18 sides, but there's a top 8 that go on to play finals in our current AFL structure. There's 24 games over a season. So yeah, that's me trying to lump in all the history from 1840s till now. Very confusing, hard to understand. I hope I sort of broke that down a bit. And now that we are in the AFL, Australian Football League, that's what we know today. The 18 sides, and there's 2 in Sydney, 2 in Brisbane, which sort of 2 in New South Wales, which is the state that they're in, 2 in Queensland for the Queensland state, 2 in Western Australia, 2 in South Australia, and the rest of the teams are in Victoria. They're also trying to establish a 19th side, which is in Tasmania, which will be called the Tasmanian Devils, and they're just currently going in negotiations to form a side. I think probably one day we'll get to a 20-team competition. We'll probably have another side in Canberra, which is our capital city, and the ACT, which is a territory. And I would say eventually they'll put a team there because I believe you need a side in the capital city. And one day we could get another side somewhere else, like Northern Territory, but the conditions are a lot more different for football during that time, and it makes it a lot harder. I'd have a big indoor air-conditioned stadium. One day, it costs a lot of money, but I believe that will eventually, don't quote me, but that will eventually happen. That's generally a 20-team comp would be good because it won't be an uneven number. So there'll be a team that will have to have a bye each week. So they brought back in the bye format the last sort of 2 years to get people introduced to having a bye. So that's not something they sort of just bring up. Yeah, so that's football. I'll go through. I did explain how the rules were created with how teams were created. My next episode, I'll actually break down the whole lot of rules, how it's formed with the rules today. And so if you turn on a game, I hope I can explain it and teach people a basic understanding, and then we'll build up to a more knowledgeable understanding. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. It was a hard one to put together, putting these teams together, and then how it was formatted, and also a bit of history for the Indigenous people as well, how it sort of the game was created for them, and then they also played the game years ago, and I thought that was pretty cool, and finding stuff like that out, and actually gone through this and gone through detail from early settlement in the 1840s till now, and how our country formed all these ideas together, and it gave us a cultural identity. It doesn't matter what background you are, where you're from. In Australia, we have people from overseas play a game. Everyone's welcome to play a game. It's great for our community. What it's done, bringing people together. Also, it goes, the army and stuff like our defense forces used to use this game to get fit back in the day as well. So there's a history of that. Before the wars and during the wars, they all got together and used this game as a fitness in the winter. It's a winter sport. So yeah, that's a bit of history there. They got together and did some stuff like that, which was pretty cool. So you also during World War One and Two, the football would stop. A lot of guys went to war, and then they'd come back, and a lot of them played. There's so many players that come back and won like McGarry medals in the SNFL or the Brownlow. I have to look that up just to confirm it, but I know definitely when the McGarry there was former soldiers that won McGarry medals. It was a great honour, and I'll actually do a podcast on some of them and explain the history of that. And I'll go through each player and their background story. There's so many cool episodes I'm going to do, stuff like that. So it's quite interesting. So I really hope you all enjoyed today's podcast. It's my second episode. I had 5 pages of notes here, so it took me a little bit to read it and understand it. I hope I got was clear, and it might have been a bit confusing, but I hope I broke it down for everyone to understand and really enjoy this podcast. And yeah, my next episode 3, will be about the current day rules, so you can learn and understand our game. And when you switch it on, you'll be able to just watch our game and enjoy it. So thank you. Cheers. I hope everyone's well, and take care. Thank you.